Hello.
大家好，Joseph nice to meet you all.
Hello.
Okay. Hi. So yeah, welcome to the State of the Ethereum Union panel. I'm Thomas Greco. I serve as an advisor to a couple different projects, including these guys' projects, like Cosmos's Interchain Foundation, also used to with Ethereum Foundation, and with Plasma. Also, one project working on Plasma called Misigo. I will be moderating this panel. So please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Joseph Kuhn, Hao. You know me from creating Lightning Network, co-author of the white paper, 闪电网络. As well as currently the area of research is inter-blockchain interoperability, especially in the context of Plasma, decentralized exchange, and interchain communications.
Alec, elder of the Ethereum project.
My name is Jake Kwan, and one of the founders of Tendermint and Cosmos. Tendermint, the consensus engine, and Cosmos, which is a network of blockchains.
So recently we've been seeing a lot of smart contract-driven blockchain projects coming up, and I think Ethereum wasn't actually the very first. Back in 2013, there were a couple of other proposals, but I think that it's safe to say that Ethereum is the one that really kind of opened the gate and showed that it was possible for computation to be done on blockchain and not just simple transfer of value, otherwise known as finance. So I think that what we have on the stage today is kind of like projects that are in the Ethereum space, which are looking to further the goals of Ethereum and seeing what can be done to deliver on the value that we've all been kind of excited about in the crypto community or the crypto space. So maybe actually, Jay, you can start by talking a little bit about what Cosmos is or what Cosmos contributes to Ethereum.
So we announced the Cosmos project actually last year in Shanghai here. It was at the Hyatt Hotel. And the purpose of the Cosmos network is to create a hub, a blockchain that is meant to connect to many other chains and act as a kind of facilitator or custodian to enable scaling, limited scaling, token-based scaling, so that many blockchains can use the same token, and also to help with interoperability, so that you can move your token from one chain to another chain through the hub, and make use of all the functions that are available on all of these different chains. So Cosmos is it's first and foremost a solution for the entire cryptocurrency space, and I think that I'm very excited to be working closely with the Ethereum team, because I feel that the Ethereum project has the most to benefit in the short term from the Cosmos project. Because if you look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin might have the Lightning Network for scaling, but when you look at Ethereum, we're looking at payment channels and state channels. Well, Cosmos, you can think of Cosmos as a kind of advanced multi-party state channel that can help scale Ethereum smart contracts, but in a limited way.
But Cosmos isn't the only effort that is attempting to do this. With the specifics of Cosmos, perhaps. Joseph Kuhn and Vitalik have just written together a paper, Plasma, Scaling Smart Contracts. Maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, Joseph.
Yeah, so in the history of scaling blockchain, if we want this stuff to truly take over the world when it comes to reframing how we think about computation and society and the social contracts, we need to be able to encompass a whole lot of data and a whole lot of processing. There has been a lot of interesting research, starting with payment channels, state channels. Lightning is an example of that. But more importantly, a lot of research with regards to sharding. You just saw Vlad Sarapier gave an excellent technical presentation about that. Plasma is another approach towards viewing the blockchain under a hierarchical system, but having enforceability. So it's sort of like, imagine if you had a court system, not everything goes to court. If there are disputes, you go to district court, and if there's a dispute there, you go to the appellate court, and ultimately the Supreme Court, which is a true source of truth and power. And viewing the blockchain within that context gives a great deal of scalability, and it's a great collaboration. Jaquan, in particular with Cosmos, has been thinking about this for a great deal of time, and I think we're on the stage to talk about sort of where the alignments are.
I think it's important to point out, perhaps we skipped over this, that Ethereum is first and foremost a community. It's a collaborative effort, and yes, there is a foundation that bears the name Ethereum Foundation, but the Ethereum community is not like a centralized top-down kind of thing. And Vitalik is the founder of the community, but is not the kind of the boss. But he is on the stage right now, so maybe you can share some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so as I pointed out several times this morning, I do think that scalability is one of the key problems that's in the blockchain technology type, which we already have, and blockchain technology. And we've been seeing like Bitcoin hit its limit at 3 transactions a second. We've been seeing Ethereum hit its current limit at about 6. And if you want to get more scalable, try to optimize the chain a bit, try to go up to but for real mainstream applications, you really need many thousands of transactions per second to be flying around for all sorts of applications. And if you want to build a platform that can serve everybody's applications, you may need to go over 100. So, in order to provide this kind of scalability, I personally don't think that it's correct to rely on any single paradigm. So, there's some people who say, we don't need any kind of special technology, we just don't have block size. That's how we get our scalability. Well, if that's what you rely on, then we won't need a network. There's other people who say, well, we don't need any kind of base layer protocol improvements, except maybe a couple of tweaks to enable some more advanced transactions, and then just absolutely everything will be solved with channel systems. And I believe that that's extremely risky. So, all of these different approaches to scalability, they all have their benefits, and they all have their particular places where they tend to do very well, but they all also tend to have their risks. So I think that if we want the Ethereum ecosystem to see the best path forward is a combination of improvements to the base Ethereum chain itself, and that includes some of the kind of lower level optimizations we're doing in the short term and in the long term. And the large focus will probably be on our work on sharding, as well as other technologies like plasma and plasma-based chains that can provide second layers that have different properties that inherently work. And what I think is interesting here is that you as someone building a project actually can be part of the Ethereum family, while at the same time doing your own project and building your own thing that experiments with innovations and advancements in scalability, transaction speed, or any other aspects of the blockchain.
So that's interesting that you basically have put out a call for additional experimentation with new scaling methods and techniques. But Ethereum itself also has some planned upgrades that will contribute to and will open the way to further scaling, such as the switch to proof of stake, which will allow base layer sharding. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, as well as some discussion about how things like Plasma or Cosmos work with that, or if this is the case, work against it.
And so first of all, just to explain what sharding is, the idea here is that one of the reasons why the blockchains of today are so slow is basically because every single node in the network needs to verify every transaction. And the one obvious corollary of that is that the entire network's capacity cannot be higher than the capacity of one single node. And so, if you try to think about the idea of putting the activity on the entire world on a single computer, you'll quickly realize that that's just very unstable and insane. So the idea behind sharding is that we can create blockchains where where it's actually a distributed network, where the work of processing transactions actually is split up between different groups of nodes. Some groups only process some transactions, some groups process other transactions. So the network can still maintain a very high level of security, but only relying on each individual node to process only a small portion of all the transaction activity of the entire chain. So this basically is the only way to increase base layer blockchain scalability without relying on nodes running in very expensive data centers. So one important point though is that these kinds of scalability upgrades with sharding are, in my view, highly complementary. The scalability upgrades that are proposed by like Plasma, Cosmos, and similar projects. And the main reason being that if you want to build some kind of layer 2 for Ethereum, ultimately for security reasons, you do need the ability to commit things to the underlying chain. And if the ability to commit things to the underlying chain is threatened because of just transaction backlogs and blockchain clogging due to not enough capacity, then it becomes a very real security. So increasing the scalability of the base chain and adding more scalability to the second layer platforms and the protocols that hook into Ethereum are both approaches that can succeed in making change.
We can talk a little bit about the unique proposition of Cosmos. It has a second layer, scaling solution to Ethereum. So just to point out maybe the difference between Cosmos and other solutions. The Cosmos Hub it runs on the Tendermint consensus engine, and Tendermint proof of stake is designed, it's designed to be specifically very good at fast finality. So that was the overarching design goal for Tendermint. And so that's Tendermint, and that's the reason why we wanted that design goal is because we want the Cosmos Hub to be useful to many chains as sort of a conduit of interoperability. The other design consideration in the design goal of the Cosmos Hub is to be a very narrow scope of solution. It's not trying to do the same thing that Ethereum scaling is trying to achieve with state sharding or smart contract calls across shards. It's only trying to keep track of which connected zones hold how many tokens. It's a very simple scope, and we intentionally are narrowing our scope that way because we believe that there's value to being specific and solving a particular niche. But this provides a lot of flexibility and a lot of utility. For example, by utilizing the Cosmos Hub, you can do all kinds of experiments, like whether it be Plasma or a new virtual machine. Heck, it could even be Casper. So once Casper is out on the Ethereum network, we can connect Casper proof of stake blockchains, such as Ethereum. I'm sure there will be others too, directly on Cosmos Hub. So our purpose is not to compete with Ethereum or any other existing chain out there. We just want to help these chains interoperate and solve a very narrow problem.
I think one way to reason about this discussion going on here is that in 2016 and part of 2015, the narrative has been blockchain technology within the context of enterprise, right? Private blockchains. One could say that the narrative this year is about token issuance and economic models, right? It's possible that the narrative next year and what is emerging out of these discussions is about blockchain interoperability and the dynamics between different blockchains, and even within a blockchain, right? Sharding on an engineering level is a similar problem set. And this is a key point because there's going to be systems such as decentralized exchanges, inter-blockchain specific application models. Cosmos is an example doing research of that when it comes to building specific examples of specific applications. Plasma is a further example. This is the current area of research and sort of the cutting edge and the forefront. And there's this dynamic where it's sort of, do you build a cathedral or do you build a bazaar, right? Do you build a dynamic where from on high you build a system and you say this is what it is? Or do you allow for experimentation? What is that? What is the dynamics for the experimentation? Right? And I think what we've all been saying is that the dynamics for experimentation is to build a collaborative environment where there is not only information sharing but true experimentation, right? The interesting with blockchain is that you have human incentives, right? Human incentives are a core component of the dynamics, and as a result, you cannot test this on a private network, right? You can't create models and have confidence in your models. Anyone that asserts, oh, well, you need to model this, is probably BSing you in many respects, right? You can model many things, but you can have like maybe 80% assurance of your models, but the 20% is the critical part, right? It's sort of like playing poker with fake money, You can do that, but you're gonna get totally different results. And as a result, we really need this true level of this Cambrian explosion of different efforts, because right now, the mistakes are billion-dollar mistakes. We need to make all the experiments now within the Ethereum community before it becomes trillion-dollar mistakes, right? So right now, I think this is sort of what we're talking about and what we're doing right now.
So that's a really interesting point. You talk about reasoning about these things. What specifically are we trying to reason about? And I don't mean like the details or the mechanics of the reasoning itself, but what are the outcomes that we are reasoning towards? I mean, are we thinking about things like, is this secure? Is this sufficiently scalable? Is this sufficiently decentralizable? What are the kind of elements in the mix?
Yeah, I think we're dealing with a lot of unknown unknowns, right? It's about it is about those factors, but it's also about what are the tendencies and the inherent properties of these systems that we're designing? Does it result in certain kinds of centralization? Does it result in certain kinds of, economic incentives when it comes to the individual participants? What are the failure modes? What are the systemic design issues with it, right? And that's something that I'm very, very confident that we can resolve, and we're finding the solutions right now. And that's why I think the community is very, very, there's a lot of excitement this year as a result, because I think, we all see the light at the end of the tunnel now, and we're all taking different approaches, and it's a matter of finding the best approach, and perhaps, the Ethereum community can adopt what makes sense.
Yeah, so I feel that perhaps one of the reasons that there's been so much rallying support around Ethereum, from the crypto community for these things, is because of, I guess, a balance between these properties that seek to preserve, the aims of decentralization and still try to be ultimately usable. Maybe Vitalik, you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I would say that, as once again I mentioned this morning, there are a lot of these kind of hard inherent trade-offs in blockchain design, and very often you can't have everything within one single system. Right? So, if within one single system you will increase the amount of transactions that can go into a block, then on the one hand, transaction fees go down, so the system becomes more accessible to central transactions. So writing to the blockchain becomes easier. But on the other hand, there's more stuff to verify until reading the blockchain. If you try to build in advanced privacy technologies, then you increase the system's code complexity and you increase your system's vulnerability to bugs in the cryptography or bugs in even cryptographic implementations you don't understand. So there are a lot of these kind of hard choices that have to be made, and I think that while we are within the paradigm of one single platform, then ultimately you do have to find some kind of path in between that tries to avoid failing too hard in any one of the kind of extreme directions. But the longer term goal also is that we first of all try to technologically innovate and to try to kind of expand out the frontier of what kinds of trade-offs are possible. So if before we were fighting between A and B, maybe try to expand out the technology, so we're fighting between A plus 2B and B plus 2A. So with technological progress we can do that. And the second thing is that if we design the system so that the system itself maximally works like a bazaar, then it's not about what you build on top of it, it's what other people build on top of it. And if other different groups of these other people have different preferences and different goals, then they can build two different sets of systems. And if you want to use one system, you can use that. And if you want to use another system, you can use that. And if you want to just do everything yourself on the base blockchain, you can do that too. And ultimately, this kind of freedom to permissionlessly innovate is what I think these kinds of systems are about, right? Like you should not have to apply for permission from a huge cabal of miners before making your own sidechain. You should not have to go and ask the current some coalition of developers behind a blockchain for permission before you want to do something cool on what the blockchain doesn't currently support. He wants to build platforms that are maximally open and decentralized and available to new kinds of innovation from the start.
Yes, that's a really interesting point, and I wonder if it might be something about the culture of Ethereum that lends itself very well to being able to experiment and innovate and go many different directions at the same time, without any kind of pushback or complaint. I mean, for example, the base layer itself, Ethereum, there's multiple implementations, right? So this is kind of, we're in within the crypto space. For example, Satoshi's opinion, Satoshi Nakamoto's opinion, was that a single implementation would be best, because X, Y, Z. Why did Ethereum, upon launch, decide to go with multiple clients?
I guess it's the main initial reason for this was that we wanted to improve development decentralization. So we wanted to basically avoid some of the failure modes that we see in other systems, where there is one dominant group of developers, and this group of developers ends up basically having this very large amount of control over what happens in the protocol. We like this idea that in order for changes to happen, you actually do need to get buy-in from many different groups. Although Ethereum is definitely not kind of perfectly decentralized right now, and although I would say at this point the main things that we would want to decentralize further is probably more on the research side than on the development side. Right? Like on the development side, if you don't like the Go clients, you can use Parity. If you don't like Parity, you can use Ethereum J. I mean, the research isn't quite there, though this kind of strategy of being this approach of being welcoming to people building their own systems on top of Ethereum is, I think, part of getting us there.
In parallel J as well.
Well, I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about two challenges that I think will be facing starting next year. So one is, we've been talking about interchain communication and collaboration among many independent chains. And what's going to happen is, eventually, we're talking about blockchain systems that are sovereign and independent of each other and yet talking to each other. For example, the Ethereum blockchain has its own consensus group, and even when it switches over to stake, it'll be its own sovereign group. Whereas the Cosmos Hub will have its own staking group, validator set, the Cosmos Hub. And yet we're going to have tokens that are essentially going to be compatible, usable from one chain to the other. At some point, if any of these chains fork or fail, we're going to have to come to consensus through ideally governments or some other means about what to do in those situations. And with the addition of many other chains, this perhaps very complex graph can be hard to manage. So I think one of the challenges we'll have to address starting soon and sometime next year is figuring out how to manage these decisions across blockchains so that we can come to a decision simultaneously to deal with failures and forks and so on. The other thing I want to mention is besides that aspect of egg security and how to deal with failure, there's also the question of how to deal with what I think what's going to happen next year and soon, and it's already been happening, is it's very easy to copy the distribution of a blockchain and to create a new chain. So we've already seen that with Ethereum, Ethereum Classic. We've seen that recently with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. And this, so far these have been mostly contentious forks where people are trying to own the name of the chain, and these are two groups that disagree strongly about what the original chain should be about. But one thing we haven't really explored yet is the copying of that distribution to a new chain, incorporating the account state of one chain into a new chain, not because you want to compete and not because you think that your chain should be called Bitcoin or Ethereum, but because you want to provide access to a wide distribution of users. So I just want to make a short announcement that the Cosmos network will be doing something similar in order to provide a fee token. So in Cosmos there's the Atom staking token, but we need a fee token, and we'd love to experiment by hard spooning the Ethereum distribution onto the Cosmos network as a new fee token.
So I think everyone probably knows what a hard fork is, but what is a hard spoon?
I think Vitalik had a great definition here.
So a hard spoon is basically when you create a new blockchain which gets its balances by copying over the account balances of another chain. It's a term that Jake Lund invented a few days ago, but it's a real term now. Use it.
Not me, right, Jake.
So what does this have to do with the concept of like a pegged token for Ethereum?
Well, I don't think it replaces the peg. So in Cosmos, we do need a fee token for our own security in Cosmos. We need a token that does not rely on a peg. But once we have a secure system, then we can think about secure pegging to Ethereum and other chains. So we're looking forward to pegging to Ethereum and helping Ether, the ETH token, scale through the Cosmos Hub. And that is separate from announcing about the hard spoon.
And that's kind of a different approach from how Plasma relates to Ethereum, isn't it? Can you talk a little bit about the Plasma concept of being like a sub-chain or a companion chain? How would you cover it?
It's definitely a child blockchain. So it's a blockchain within a blockchain that allows you to reach scalability. And in many cases, there would be token issuance within that child blockchain, but it's ultimately enforced by the parent chain. One thing is that, you're going to see a lot of inter-community dynamics as a result, and this is sort of the underlying discussion right now. And like Vitalik was saying earlier, it's running permissionlessly on top of Ethereum, and Plasma is an example of that type of dynamic that he was discussing about. But I think there's a lot of different approaches and a lot of different things that need to be experimented with. And it's sort of the token issuance model that Jay was talking about in many respects. Some also call it an airdrop and things like that, is about the community sort of coming together and sort of like building on the network effects in both directions.
So it's interesting because both these projects seem to actually be fairly independent projects, like independent of Ethereum. And yet, Jay and Joseph, you've both chosen to kind of face towards Ethereum and like build on and build as part of Ethereum. And this is kind of interesting because, Joseph, you come from the Bitcoin community and you invented Lightning networks.
And still part of many communities.
Sure. But you're most known for that sort of radical, like Lightning network, like scalability for Bitcoin finally approach. back in, I believe, 2015 was when the paper came out. And Jay, you're the inventor of Tendermint, which is like, you know, a separate like a proof of stake approach. Though it seems that for Casper, Vitalik, you guys have maybe moved a little bit towards the Tendermint direction as well for Ethereum. But what is it that makes it so that you are in your work and in your presence on the stage today, part of this Ethereum union? You know, why is it that there are many Ethereum kind of Me Too competitors coming out over this last half year or so? Why do you want to so clearly align with Ethereum?
I'd say it's really the philosophy of open collaboration and just experimentation. You know, we're all here because we believe in the ultimate vision, and I think we all believe, that the way to achieve that is to collaborate. There is no one chain wins all in this world. Just like the internet is an open network of participants. That's the vision that we want to create for the blockchain world.
Yeah, on my end, I feel like, you know, there is a lot of technical developments, and Ethereum is certainly on the forefront of research when it comes to economic models, incentive mechanisms, and just mechanism design in general. It's also very welcoming towards new participants and encompassing its designs into its own platforms. And I think, you know, there is a lot of new blockchain projects coming out, but it's not, at its core, it's not about, you know, the selling point, the pitch. Ultimately, it's about the community, and it's about a deep-rooted culture of technological development and open collaboration in such a way where we can like really build a great future.
It's also about serving the needs of the community too, isn't it? I mean, projects like Cosmos and Plasma will allow like community tools that are really useful and valuable, such as decentralized exchanges. Like, for example, the OMG network, which is currently being built on Plasma, or Cosmos has the Cosmos DEX, which will be built in connection with the Cosmos Hub. I mean, these are things that maybe particularly now, given regulatory dynamics, these are quite useful things in the crypto space. What do you think is really the value of I guess, scaling and accelerating these approaches in order to make Ethereum deeply usable? And since Vitalik has picked up the mic, perhaps we actually have to finish very, very soon. I guess, what is your thought on other projects, like trying to build in coordination with or in conjunction with Ethereum to provide the tools that Ethereum perhaps isn't ready to produce today due to wanting to be very careful about building the correct direction, but which will also certainly try to provide directly perhaps in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like if someone who's looking to build a new blockchain platform finds some way to build it that's kind of collaborative and becomes a part of the Ethereum ecosystem, then I mean, on the one hand, they get the independence that they need to build their own thing and experiment with their own ideas around privacy, scalability, consensus algorithms. But on the other hand, they still get access to this large community and user base that is really interested in trying and experimenting with new and interesting things. And I think that's, first of all, that's definitely a great place to be for a developer. And second of all, I think that's also great for the ecosystem because we can simultaneously benefit from having a properly designed base layer chain which optimizes for both a strong balance of capability and decentralization, while at the same time having various different offshoots that can optimize more for one particular thing for those groups that need that more. And I think that's exactly the sort of direction that the space should be going in.
Okay, well, I guess that's it for our time. Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here with you, Jay and Joseph Vitalik.